Welcome back to Korean True Crime with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. This is part 2 of the Yoo Youngchul case, so please go back, take a listen if you haven't already. I will give a very brief summary to refresh your memory. But first, thank you to my amazing patrons for making this show possible. If you would like to support Korean True Crime on Patreon, the link is in the description. Join us on Discord for movie nights featuring films based off of real crimes. It's a really great way to get to know Korean True Crime fans. If you're interested in new merch for the show, you can find our new design, God's Wrath, on my Fourth Wall store, which is also in the description. If you're listening to this episode as it comes out, we are doing a giveaway of a t-shirt of our new design. There will possibly be more giveaways in the future, so check out my socials at Korean True Crime. A main source of research for today's episode is the amazing podcast Dark Side of Seoul, who covered Yoo Youngchul's crimes in 2021. Their amazingly organized research served as a foundation for my own. Shout out to them for their hard work and thank you for being so thorough. I'll put a link to their episode in my description. Give them a listen. I have been a long-time fan. Warning: today's episode contains graphic descriptions of violence and sexual abuse. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Yoo Youngchul had killed 8 people from September 24th, 2003 to November 18th, 2003. He was dubbed the Raincoat Killer because he often wore a yellow raincoat to avoid getting blood on his clothes, although this detail wouldn't be known until after he was caught. All of his victims to this point had been bludgeoned to death with a sledgehammer he had modified to have a very short handle. During his last murder, he cut his knuckles accidentally while using a pair of shears to try to force open a safe inside the victim's home. He was trying to stage the home to look like a robbery. After cutting his hand, he bled all over the floor. In a panic, he grabbed newspapers and clothes and set the home on fire, trying to get rid of all of the DNA he left behind. Having been upset due to his plans being thrown askew, he walked by a CCTV camera during his escape, which caught him from behind, revealing his height and general appearance, although unfortunately not catching his face. Despite the public having no real indication of what he looked like, he was scared that this meant he would finally be caught and brought to justice. The police began handing out flyers with a general description: a man in his 20s or 30s, 5'5" or 168 centimeters tall, wearing Kumkang brand boots. More than 100,000 flyers were passed out searching for a man that fit this description, but this description would fit a lot of men. The police began searching for any and all purchases of these specific kinds of shoes. There had been 15,000 pairs sold nationwide, but specifically, they wanted to know about the size 260, or size 8 US men's. This narrowed it down a lot, and after some further specifications, they were able to dwindle that number down to 377 people. The issue is, the police recorded the shoe size as 260. They spent weeks searching for size 260. But the shoe prints would later be reevaluated by the prosecution as the correct size, 275, which Yoo Youngchul wore a size 275. He thought they were on his tracks, but in reality, they weren't even making progress in the right direction. He still cut up those shoes into tiny pieces and scattered them in various garbage cans around the city. Before his first murder, he had moved out of his mother's home where he had been staying with his mother and twin sister. He moved into a goshwan, or a very small apartment. Following the exposure of his image on CCTV, he moved from the small apartment in Shinsurang, which is the same area that he had committed his first murder. He hadn't traveled far to find his first victim at all. After, he moved from that small apartment to a modest-sized studio apartment in Nogo-sandong, which is a few neighborhoods away, probably like 15 minutes away, if that. They're within the same area of Mapogu, which is a district in Seoul. If you're interested, he lives like 15 minutes away from Ewha Women's University and like 10 minutes away from Hongdae, which is one of the most famous or infamous parts of Korea. He's in the center of a very active part of the city. which means he's also living near a lot of nightlife, brothels, gentlemen's clubs, bars. This area since has been completely revamped, but at the time it was pretty notorious for its seediness and low-key danger. It's in this new area that he spends a lot of his time, continuing to extort money from businesses by impersonating a police sergeant. To him, he doesn't really need to lay low from his extortion business because that's unrelated to the murders. It's while he is meeting illegal brothel owners, pornography peddlers, and drug dealers that he meets a girl he takes a liking to, Ms. Kim. She's 26 at the time, he's 33. He meets her around December 2003. It's been about 1 month since the murder of homeowner Kim Jong-suk and his housekeeper Bae Ji-hye that resulted in Yoo Youngchul trying to burn down their house. It's also been a month since his vague description was spread everywhere, including that very blurry CCTV picture of him from behind, the one that truly revealed nothing about him. His appearance from behind looked average. For the most part, he's just laying low. He's in a cooling off period. While he can't commit any more murders, he decides to pursue some love. He starts flirting with Miss Kim at her work. She's working at a bodobang, which I was confused by this term at first because I'd never heard this referred to as a bodobang, so I found the origin of its meaning to best explain. Bodo is a combination of the final syllables of doul bo and ikurdo, which means to help and to lead. Pang is just a room. It's evolved over time from being a place you could find employment to being a term used to describe an escort service. I had asked a native Korean friend and they told me they thought it meant po from poji, which is a non-medical term for a vagina, and do from dome, which means wholesale. While this is clever, it is not the true origin of the word. Places that offer escort services are not offering that service as their main source of income on paper. They're operating motels, singing rooms, or bars that hire those women to be their servers, bartenders, room attendants, etc. I've always heard this job referred to as juicy girls, which I don't think is a kind term considering modern days. A lot of these women are being human trafficked into jobs from other countries. Many of these podobangs work very differently. Some are escort services where you just call and a girl shows up for you. Some are clubs, bars, they're all different. All of this information just to say, Miss Kim was a sex worker for a podobang. It's important to understand this because going forward, it would really inform a lot of Yoo Youngchul's decisions. I want it to be said that Korean True Crime is a sex work and all consensual work positive channel. Let that be said. But we do not know about Miss Kim's willingness to work as a sex worker. Miss Kim had started dating Yoo Youngchul and she moved into his apartment very soon after that. I mean, like weeks after that. They started traveling together a lot, all over South Korea, to the southern coast, Busan, Gwangju, everywhere. He starts gifting her expensive jewelry that's way beyond his means to afford. Jewelry that would be suspiciously similar to the kind that his previous victims might have worn. There was a necklace, a pair of earrings, and a bracelet. It has not been confirmed, but when Yoo Youngchul was questioned by the police about it, he told them he just found the jewelry in a shopping bag, discarded outside. Yeah, like that happened. The jewelry we can almost guarantee was stolen from one of the victims' homes. Within 2 months, Yoo Youngchul was planning to propose to Miss Kim. His plans were intercepted by the police when he is arrested on a theft charge in January 2004, after they'd been dating a little over a month. Miss Kim, in the meantime, had discovered that her new boyfriend had quite the extensive rap sheet. She had no idea he had been in and out of trouble his entire life. She was willing to accept some minor things, but after learning the extent of it, she didn't want anything to do with him. But it wasn't that easy to leave him. When he got out of jail, he popped the question. He asked her to marry him. That was a huge shock to her. She'd been planning to break up with him, and now he's proposing. We don't really know how much time passed between the proposal and the next event, but sometime between that proposal, possible rejection, and February 29, 2004, Yoo Youngchul discovered that Miss Kim had been going behind his back and cheating on him, much like his father had done to his mother. He confronts her, which turns into a huge fight. At this point, she was already done with their relationship, so she just decides to insult him by saying that now, if he wants to have sex with her, he has to pay for it. She tries to leave after this statement, but he snaps. She has no clue he would be so violent, but he begins to beat her, tying her up, and sexually assaults her. She is held captive for 36 hours before she is able to get hospital treatment. I will not go into any more detail about this assault, but it was violent. Before she escaped, he told her, "It's not a big deal to kill someone like you. Do you think there are no perfect crimes? I've done many things I'll never be caught for." She promised to never report him to the police, which is a promise she kept because he threatened to kill her family if she ever did. Miss Kim spent a while in the hospital, and after her recovery, she never saw Yoo Youngchul again. She changed her address, her phone number, she went into hiding. And I'm glad she got away because of how easy it was for him to escalate. It's likely he would have killed her. Prior to her changing her number, Yoo Youngchul was texting her constantly, apologizing, promising he'd never do it again, the typical abuse cycle bullshit. But thankfully, she was able to escape. Youngchul did not take this breakup well, and he used it as an excuse to victimize himself, stating that women had also wronged him. 16 days later, on March 16th, 2004, he calls for a girl from a nearby podobang he frequents and asks for a girl to meet him in front of a mall in Seodaemun, which is kind of near where he lives. The woman who was sent was Kwon Jin-hee, a 23-year-old woman who showed up to find Yoo Youngchul, nicely groomed, dressed up in what he would wear as an undercover cop, but he wasn't showing her the badge just yet. He casually spoke to her as they walked from the mall to his apartment not too far away. It was a typical call. She most likely often met businessmen and office workers that looked just like him. When they arrived at his apartment, he asked the woman to shower while he got ready. After they had sex, he refuses to pay her, pulling out his fake police badge stating that he's an undercover cop and he has been sent to crack down on sex work in the area. As Kwon Jin-hee tries to leave, he grabs her by the throat with both hands and shoves her into his bathroom. There, he chokes her until she dies on the floor. This is his first ever murder, where he cannot flee the scene after staging it. He has killed a woman in cold blood in his own home, but he isn't panicking because he's been preparing for this all along. He's been ruminating about his hatred of women, especially sex workers. Yoo Youngchul would say that when he was a child, his stepmother was actually a sex worker as well, and had on multiple occasions been sent out by his gambling alcoholic father to buy condoms. He would later add that his father had a type because his mother also had a history of working as a sex worker. In the previous weeks, as he had let the anger fester, growing until the only thing he could think of was murder, he went out and got a full body x-ray. He took the copies of the scans home, kept them to study his own anatomy. He had planned how he would dispose of the women's bodies as he studied his own x-ray. He started to use a hacksaw to start by dismembering her head, but it was taking longer than he anticipated, so he switched to a hunting blade. He turned on the shower to hide any noises, then turned on some music. Specifically, he played Vangelis's Conquest of Paradise, which is a song from Ridley Scott's film 1492 Conquest of Paradise. The atmosphere of this soundtrack is very heroic, and clearly, Yoo Youngchul was hyping himself up to feel like this vigilante, like he was cleaning up the wealthy and the impure women. That was his mindset as he committed his crimes. He was thinking of himself as some kind of punisher. As he cut off Kwon Jin-hee's head, he tied her hair with a thick rubber band, then hung her head on the toilet paper holder. Beneath was a plastic trash can to collect the draining blood. Over the next hours, he would dismember her body into 10 small black garbage bags, then put those bags into 4 larger black bags. All the while, his water has been running and music has been playing. This is a really cheap apartment, so there's often loud noises. People aren't too concerned. But in places like these, you often split the water bill evenly among your neighbors. The times he is killing women, the building's water bill was higher than their rent. A neighbor had complained to the landlord that they had heard water running all night from Yoo Youngchul's unit, but no one could have ever imagined what he was doing in the middle of the night. After he had finished dismembering her body, he cleaned his bathroom, then collected the garbage bags and took a taxi to the mountain behind Sogang University's library. Beneath a tree, he started to bury the bags, but he was paranoid. His fingerprints were on those bags. What if the police found them quickly? So he dug the bags back up, opened them up, and dumped out the body parts into the dirt. He then buried them again, but this time, he took the bags with him. He was trying to think of anything that could get him caught. He believed he would be the world's greatest killer, whether because he wanted notoriety from the amount of people he killed, or because he would have so much control over whether these women lived or died. He was planning to completely repeat that night's plan again and again, and he would. A month later, he hasn't chosen a new target yet. But then he sees one, which doesn't fit in his newly chosen MO. He's already going off script. Yoo Youngchul is out making money extorting businesses. It's a lucrative business because police at this time are widely and openly taking bribes. Sex work, human trafficking, drug dealing, all these seedy underbelly businesses are openly operating. They weren't hiding in basements or in the back of buildings. They were openly advertising their services because of shitty police. Youngchul was taking advantage of this. On April 13, 2004, in Dongdaemun, Seoul, he chose a man peddling fake Viagra and bootleg copies of pornography out front of a pharmacy. He watched the man selling to a few customers throughout the night. That man was An Jae-sun, a 44-year-old man who had a long history of run-ins with the law due to him peddling his illegal wares. Yoo Youngchul approached the man as he packed up his drugs and films. Tonight, he wasn't Yoo Youngchul. He was Sergeant Tae of the Seoul Metropolitan Police. He pulls out his fake police badge and tells An Jae-sun, "You're under arrest for selling fake pharmaceuticals." An Jae-sun, having known the routine, didn't resist as he was handcuffed and led to the unmarked police van. But he also had done this many times before. He had never been approached by a singular officer. Officers always work in pairs. It was unsafe for them to work alone. As he was put in the back of the van, he started questioning Yoo Youngchul's credentials. Yoo Youngchul starts to drive with An Jae-sun in the back seat, dissecting his disguise. See, Youngchul had not planned to kill this man. He had done this countless times before. You put them in the back of your car, and as you're driving towards the police station, they bribe you, you let them out of your car, net profit. He didn't want to make it to the police station. He'd hope that An Jae-sun would offer him something he wanted. Then he'd let him go, pretending he was just a dirty cop. But An Jae-sun was saying way too much. He outed him as a fake cop. Yoo Youngchul had to regain control, so he decided to kill him. Yoo Youngchul drove to a parking lot near his apartment, outside of a hospital. He didn't want An Jae-sun to scream, so he told him he was going to let him go because he was just doing this for a quick buck. He closed the car door, went home, grabbed his murder tools, then came back. He told him, "I'm going to drive you and drop you off somewhere." This parking lot would be way too busy for him to kill, so he got back in the driver's seat and moved to a more secluded parking lot. There, he got out, opened the back door. An was expecting to get up out of this van and go home, but Yoo Youngchul put on his gloves, grabbed An by the hair, and stabbed him in the neck and head quickly. A quick, silent murder. Or so he thought. An was still alive, but barely, as he laid him backwards onto the seat. An started kicking out, trying to fight for his life. Yoo Youngchul still had the advantage, though, because An Jae-sun was handcuffed. He took his knife, stabbed him again in the thigh. Blood is going everywhere in the van, so he quickly grabs a trash bag to try to cover up An's body. Knives are not his preferred tool, so he switched to his customized hammer and hit An Jae-sun in the head 20 times. I've said this before, but he is so much more angry, brutal, and unforgiving when it comes to men. Whenever he targets women, it seems like he's aiming to knock them out quickly, not make them suffer a brutal death, although mercy is not the word I would use to describe his actions. Regardless, he is a horrific killer to his victims, but the anger and malice he shows when killing men, specifically, should be noted. Afterwards, he noticed a cut on his hand he had gotten while stabbing the victim. Accidentally, he'd sliced his own finger. Blood from his hand had dripped inside the van and onto the ground. He made a mistake again. And like last time, he would decide to cleanse the DNA with fire. In the meantime, he had to get rid of An Jae-sun's body. So he covered the body with clothes and newspapers, just as he had done at the home of Kim Jong-suk in November 2003. During the night, 1 a.m., April 14th, he parks the van between two fuel tank trucks in Samho petrochemical lot, all the way in Incheon, over an hour away. He wanted the body not to just burn in the van. He wanted nothing to remain. Before he left, he wanted insurance that if the body did remain, that the police wouldn't have anything to connect him to the crime. There would be marks from the handcuffs on the wrists, so he decided to cut off An Jae-sun's hands to prevent the police from seeing that the victim didn't do this in a suicide attempt, and to prevent the victim from being ID'd. He took the hands with him in plastic bags. After lighting a piece of newspaper on fire inside the van, the explosion and subsequent fire completely burned everything, to the point that even DNA from his bones were almost impossible to be collected. Yoo Youngchul needed the hands to never be found as well, so he decided to throw these into the breakwater stones near a fishing market. Breakwaters, to be specific, are man-made structures, usually in the shape of what I've always said look like jacks. They're used to disrupt waves and lessen their impact on land. The crevices in between these are just big enough to drop in a hand and not be able to retrieve it. An Jae-sun wasn't just a victim. None of the victims' lives were defined by them being victims of Yoo Youngchul. And it's really sad that often we don't get to know much about the victims' lives to remember them properly. Many Korean cases, we don't even learn their names, which is understandable. But when we do, I'd like to present them as more than just a victim. An Jae-sun is someone who we get to know a little bit more about. He was a breadwinner for his family of 4 younger siblings. He cared for his family deeply, and yes, he did work in the sale of illegal products, but he still was a loving person. After his death, his family was devastated, to say the least. All of these victims had families who loved them deeply. In 2011, SBS visited the An family to see how they were doing. They learned that in November 2004, 7 months after the death of An Jae-sun, the second youngest brother had taken his own life, which caused his girlfriend such grief that she also took her own life. In the next year, July 2005, the youngest brother also took his own life. The last brother remained, but he had also attempted suicide and survived. Following this, he told SBS he didn't try again because he couldn't leave his dog alone in the world. When SBS visited and talked to him, he was still suffering severe psychological distress. He spent most of his days intoxicated, abusing prescription drugs, unable to sleep because of how angry and sad he felt. Not a day went by that he didn't hate Yoo Youngchul for destroying his whole family. That is what Yoo Youngchul was doing to the world. And he's not even losing any sleep about it. He's not even thinking twice about his victims. He didn't even know their names. He didn't care to. The only thing he's thinking about is what he's going to do next. A month later, Yoo Youngchul decides it's time to begin killing once again. Enough time had passed, and the police didn't really seem to be on his trail, and he's feeling that itch again. We're going to go through the next few cases quite quickly, because the details of these attacks are very similar, as well as the body disposals are very similar. This does not mean they don't deserve the same amount of attention as the other victims who had more information. On May 7, 2004, he calls another escort service to request a girl meet him outside another busy area near a movie theater. For Kim Hee-sun, the 25-year-old woman who arrives, it's a typical service call. So she follows him, makes small talk until they reach his apartment. He asks her to shower, they have sex, but this time he waits until she is unsuspecting, strikes her in the back of the head with his hammer. Before she is even dead, he begins to decapitate her. Everything else is done in the same manner, except this time he took the knife to her hand and cut off each of her fingertips, hoping to ensure that she could never be identified. He flushed these fingertips down the toilet. He had sex with Kim Hee-sun. He realized that DNA could identify him, and therefore he didn't want her to be identifiable. This time, he brings the 4 large trash bags to a construction site near a mountain. A sauna was going to be built there, right next to Bongwon-sa Temple, which is a Buddhist temple, which I believe that dry sauna is actually still there next to that temple. Then, the next day, he revisits the movie theater from the night before and goes into a PC방, which is an internet cafe. While he's there, he sees a woman, 25-year-old Shin Min-ah, who is sending messages as an escort to meet with clients. He approaches her and decides to use his police badge to intimidate her. He takes her back to his office till, asks her to shower, but before he has sex with her, he hits her with the hammer and kills her. He realizes he can't have sex with these women if he wants to keep getting away with murder. He goes through the same disposal routine, the music, the water, the dismemberment, the trash bags. Everything is the same. At this point, he is completely consumed by the thoughts of his next murder. Yoo Youngchul would reveal in a letter to a victim's family member that he was also regularly taking drugs during this time. We don't know which drugs he was taking because he wouldn't talk about it with the police, but that he said when he looked into the bathroom mirror, as he was working on dismembering a woman's body, he would see himself smiling, crazily, laughing, but he wasn't. He would touch his face and realize he was crying. Yoo Youngchul was going through a full psychotic break at this point. The point of no return was a year prior, but now he had completely lost his humanity and grasp on reality. He only waits a month after this to kill again. On June 2nd, 2004, he meets another sex worker, Han Suk-ja, a 35-year-old woman. They meet and return to his apartment. Reports state that he only had sex with one of the women he killed, but it isn't consistent across all sources, articles, or journals. So we can only assume that from here on, he killed the women as they entered his bathroom, where he kept his hammer on a nearby shelf. On June 4th, 2004, he would call for another escort. Chung Young-ae, a 29-year-old woman who arrived, and Yoo Youngchul murdered her and buried her with the rest of the victims. June 9th, 5 days later, he kills Jang Kwang, a 26-year-old woman. 9 days later, June 18th, he kills Kim Ji-ho, a 27-year-old woman. 7 days later, June 25th, he kills Woo Koo-yeon, a 28-year-old woman. 7 days later, July 2nd, he kills Go Mi-young, a 26-year-old woman. 7 days later, July 9th, he kills Go Sun-hee, a 24-year-old woman. 4 days later, July 13th, he kills Im Mi-yeon, a 27-year-old woman. Except for Ji-hee, all 10 victims are buried on the mountain. All of these women were struck with his hammer to the back of their heads as they went to the shower. His last victim, Im Mi-yeon, as he walked with her, he promised her an extra 50,000 won, or like $50. Im Mi-yeon was happy to have a generous client and called her brothel manager to tell him about the incoming extra deposit, and that it was from her client. The manager told her, "Great job, hurry up, the next client is waiting for you in Hwagok-dong, so go straight there when you're done." That gave Yoo Youngchul an idea. Im Mi-yeon had arrived by her own car. He could lead the manager off his trail by disposing of her car near Hwagok-dong, where she was expected to be next. After killing Mi-yeon and burying her body on the mountain, he drove her car to Hwagok-dong and used her cell phone to call her boyfriend. After a few moments of silence, he hung up. It appeared now that she went missing near her next client's apartment. But his back-to-back murders were going to catch up with him because these weren't perfect crimes. He was just overconfident, believing with each murder that he was an untouchable god cleaning the streets of impure women. But he was making mistakes all the time. Yoo Youngchul thought he was slick, avoiding suspicion by calling different escort services under fake names. But here's the thing. He was using the same phone each time. A cell phone he stole from Woo Koo-yeon, the 28-year-old sex worker he murdered on June 25th. What he didn't know was that many of these podobangs were run by the same gang, overseen by a man we'll call Mr. No. This guy wasn't just a brothel owner, he was a really big player in Seoul's illegal scene, running escort services, motels, and who knows what else. Yoo Youngchul, despite dating Miss Kim, a sex worker, never pieced together that these businesses were connected. For a guy who thought he was a criminal mastermind, that's a really big oversight. On July 13th, 2004, Mr. No gets a call. Im Mi-yeon never showed up to her next client in Hwagok-dong after meeting a man in Nogo-san-dong, and her car was found idling. This wasn't the first time he had gotten this call, actually. Over the past month, 2 other women from his businesses had vanished, and now Im Mi-yeon made 3. Mr. No wasn't just worried about his workers, he was losing money and reputation. He started calling managers of nearby podobangs asking if they had gotten calls from that number. They had. He frequently was hiring women. But not just that, several of those women had gone missing after answering calls from that number. They hadn't put that together yet. The pieces were falling into place, and Mr. No realized that this was not random. Mr. No and his gangster buddies really had a good relationship with the police. Bribes were as common as chlamydia in Seoul's underworld, and the police often were looking the other way. So Mr. No reached out to Inspector Yang from the Mobile Investigations Unit, a guy who owed him a favor when he was acting as an informant in a drug bust a few years back. Inspector Yang told him, "If that number calls again, let me know and I'll go stake out the guy." At the time, everyone, Mr. No, the gangsters, even the police, were thinking that this was a human trafficking ring. Sex workers being kidnapped and sold wasn't unheard of, especially with the ongoing issue of women being trafficked to rural areas to work as slaves or brides. No one really was suspecting that this was a serial killer. On July 15th, 2004, at 2 a.m., 2 days after the death of Im Mi-yeon, they get a call from that stolen number again. Yoo Youngchul, oblivious that he is being tracked, had called a podobang for a girl again. Mr. No's crew played it cool, acting like this was business as usual, but they were ready to catch him. A group of gangsters piled into a car and they decided to tail the sex worker who was taking a taxi to the meeting spot. Yoo Youngchul had asked her to meet him at Sincheon Grand Mart, which is in Nogo-san-dong, near his house. They hid in a nearby alley, watching from the shadows, trying to see who met up with the woman. Mr. No had called Inspector Yang, but Yang was way too far away to get there soon. He said he'd try, but they were on their own for now. After waiting for a while, they received a call from Yoo Youngchul again. He switched the meeting spot to a nearby park because the mart was too busy. So they all moved to the park, keeping their distance, hiding in the shadows. Youngchul was already there. He was lurking, but he was staying hidden, like he always did. When the woman approached the park as planned, Youngchul called the podobang again, rejecting her because she was too tall for his liking. This wasn't new behavior. He had done this every time he called a podobang. He turned away women for being too tall, too fat, too ugly, likely because the larger or taller the woman was, the harder they would be to dismember and dispose of. He said he only wanted to kill beautiful women. But the podobang owners put up with this because he paid well and he was always tipping extra. Greed was keeping them compliant. Youngchul requested another woman and then a third. On the third, he finally agreed. Mr. No and his crew were scanning the park. It had been hours, desperately trying to spot him. They couldn't lose him tonight. Then Mr. No saw him, a man leaning against a telephone pole in the dark, on the phone, calling for that third woman. That was their guy. Mr. No called Inspector Yang again, but he was still too far out. So he dialed the nearby precinct and asked for a patrol car to back them up. 10 minutes later, the gangsters were absolutely sure this was their caller. He was going to meet the woman. So they made a plan to ambush him, thinking this is the footman for a trafficking ring. The gangsters slowly approached Youngchul, who acted oblivious. He knew he had nothing incriminating on him. He was just a client meeting a sex worker. When they start searching him, he plays dumb, saying, "Are you looking for the guy wearing short sleeves? I think he went that way." But then the police patrol arrives and Inspector Kim Song-gi from Sogang Precinct moves in to handcuff him. Youngchul resists, fighting against 5 gangsters and 2 cops. There's no way he's winning that fight. Finally, Inspector Yang shows up, takes charge of the situation, and handcuffs him. As he gets him into the patrol car, he notices Yoo Youngchul is chewing something. He's panicking. He thinks he might be swallowing a poison pill, like some trafficking goon avoiding capture. So they pry open his mouth. There's no pill, just 9 business cards for all of the podobangs linked to the missing women. They search his whole body, and they find the stolen phone and an Agata wristwatch that was later tied to Im Mi-yeon. They had their guy. But I want this to be very clear. The police did not catch Yoo Youngchul. Local gangsters and podobang owners did, protecting their workers. I am not here to glorify their shady businesses. Human trafficking and exploitation are very real issues in the sex work industry. But they did more than the police, who had been chasing a size 260 shoe print while Yoo Youngchul wore size 275 just because they measured wrong. The police tried to spin it, claiming that they had sent an officer to the scene, but the only thing they did was show up and try to cuff him and take all the credit. The Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency would later admit that they did receive help, but they still really patted themselves on the back. Reward money was given to Mr. No and some of the other men who helped capture Yoo Youngchul, For the 5 gangsters, they got about 5 million won each, or less than $5,000. The women who risked their lives that night as bait got nothing at all. And the 50 million won bounty on Yoo Youngchul's head suddenly didn't exist because they didn't want to pay gangsters that much. 6 months later, those same brothel owners would suddenly be arrested for their illegal operations in a crackdown in the area. Likely, they were being targeted to hide their involvement so they could sweep it right under the rug. At the station, the police began interrogating Yoo Youngchul. They started with, "Where'd you get the phone?" He spun a story about finding it on the road. He said he'd found it tossed out of a car window. Then they asked him about the expensive women's jewelry he had on him. He had an anklet and a watch, to be specific. At this point, they think he's a low-ranking member in a human trafficking ring, probably also a thief, so they start pressing him harder. That's when Yoo Youngchul decided he wants notoriety. He wants fame. He wasn't getting out of this, so he decides to lean into the infamy. He tells them, "I'll explain the anklet later, but why don't we start with the Shinsadong murder case?" He starts to confess to everything, claiming he had killed 26 people since September 2003, from wealthy elderly to sex workers. He demands first to call his mom before he continues to confess, so they let him. On the phone, he tells his mom, "Mom, I killed a lot of people," and apologizes to her. Then the police would make a huge mistake. At around 12:05 on July 16th, during the interrogation, Yoo Youngchul fakes an epileptic seizure, something he'd failed to pull off in that 2002 rape arrest. The officers, not thinking clearly, remove his handcuffs and help him get up, but don't put them back on him. If he was sick, they legally would need to take him to a hospital. But he tells them he's fine. He says, "I'll take you to Bongwonsa Temple to go find the bodies right now." So they start to walk him down the hallway to the parking lot to get in a police van. This is where the big mistake happens. He was behind the officers, unsupervised as he walks behind them. So he turns, bolts down a different corridor, and out the main entrance into the night. At 1 a.m., he calls his mom and twin sister, begs them, "Destroy everything in my apartment. Please, go there now. Just throw everything away." He then holes up in a motel near Yeongdongpo Market, buying 360 sleeping pills to take his own life. The police couldn't find him because his ID and records all had his old address. They had no idea where he was currently living, but he didn't know this, so he was avoiding his old apartment. Of course, his family did not go to his apartment. They did not assist in the destruction of evidence, thankfully. His freedom only lasted 12 hours. At 11:40 a.m., the mobile investigation team spotted him on a crosswalk. They arrested him again, and this time, they weren't taking any chances. Back in custody, Yoo Youngchul decides it's time to actually confess. He admitted talking to the sex workers for an hour before killing them, eating ramen with them, chatting with them about their lives, all while pretending to be a client or a cop. Using his fake police badge, he often would force them to leave voicemails for family or managers, saying that they were quitting their jobs, running away, being kidnapped, to throw off suspicions. He claimed he only slept with one of the victims, fearing DNA evidence, but reports are inconsistent. He also said he kept a detailed diary of the victims' lives just to remember them, but the police never found any evidence of this, physical or digital. We think that's just another Yoo Youngchul lie. The interrogation was a mess, to say the least. He went on a hunger strike, claiming he had lost his appetite. He had previously admitted to heavy drug use, so this could have been due to detox. His body and mind were crashing as the high of control was fading from his life. Some psychologists think that this is when he realized he was not a god, just a man in handcuffs. Others say that he was playing it up. He was always a performer. 4 days after his arrest, the police let media into his Nogosandong apartment, which is a really interesting choice. But it's the reason we know so much about Yoo Youngchul. His apartment wasn't clean, but it was really well organized, obsessively so. Psychologists would later suggest that Yoo Youngchul had OCD. They noted that he confined all of his murders to the bathroom in his apartment. He wanted the rest of the apartment sacred for his normal life. On his bed, they found a black scrapbook, like a high schooler's Tumblr mood board. It was filled with newspaper clippings, personal notes, and dreams of furniture, car, music, computers. all annotated like a vision board for a life he wished he had. His movie collection was also telling a story about his life. He had Public Enemy, Very Bad Things, and Normal Life. All films glamorizing serial killers, criminals, or strippers getting killed. He wasn't just living his crimes, he was curating this fantasy where he was a cool anti-hero. But the craziest part of this case came during the interrogations. He told the police he was a cannibal. He said he ate the internal organs of his victims, specifically those with blood type O, believing that this would cure his epilepsy or cleanse his spirit based on old Korean folklores that human livers would heal you. He claimed he ground up the organs in a meat grinder, but then stopped doing this because he hated the sound. The police found no evidence of a grinder or a mixer, and while 4 victims did have their organs missing, this is more likely to his ever-evolving disposal methods. Many investigators think he confessed to cannibalism to cement his legacy, like Jeffrey Dahmer or Andrei Chikatilo, who are forever remembered as some of the worst killers because they were demented cannibals. There's a really old Korean proverb, "He patted me on the back while removing my liver to eat." It talks about being tricked by someone, and Yoo Youngchul was a con man all the way to his core. Youngchul was obsessed about his image. He told the press, "I hope my notoriety will be widely known for using people's imagination for what I actually did. I want to be recorded as a hero in the criminal world." He wanted to create fictional stories about how horrific he was, how he was the smartest killer in history. He would even ask prison guards, "Did I look good on TV today?" And he would say he hoped that because of him, women won't act recklessly and the wealthy will be awakened. He genuinely thought he was sparking a revolution, like the Joker or like some Rorschach-style vigilante exposing society's flaws. And you know what? Some people bought it. Within a week of his arrest, a forum popped up called Coolest Murderer Yoo Youngchul Cafe. Tons of different fan clubs popped up praising him. And membership spiked, mostly because people were just cursing out the website, but the fact that these sites even existed is wild. The media was going crazy too. His name was all over front page news, top TV stories, and even all over fan sites. All of this was just feeding Yoo Youngchul's ego. The police, in the meantime, were trying to corroborate his confession of both cannibalism and the number of murders he was confessing to. DNA found on his hammer matched only some of the victims, and his shoe size matched the various crime scenes, although he had long since gotten rid of the shoes he wore during the home invasions. But besides that, physical evidence was sparse. The police mainly were focusing on his confession rather than collecting evidence at the crime scenes, which years later, the police would be criticized for doing so because Yoo Youngchul was lying every time he opened his mouth. He wanted his crimes to seem scarier, more gruesome, more terrifying than they actually were, which they already were horrific, but he wanted that fame. He had even told them about that diary he kept of all of the killings, which never existed. The police never found it, and he refused to help them locate anything. For the most part, he was staying silent during interrogations, but he would start to confess once the chief superintendent of the Seoul Metropolitan Police began questioning him, because this made him feel important. He kept changing his story. First it was 20 victims, then 26 victims. Then he confessed to a new murder altogether, the murder of a woman in Imundong who was murdered February 6, 2004. This is a month prior to him killing the first escort woman. This is a huge shock to the police because this case does not fit his MO. If this was prior to the rest of the killings, it might make sense he hadn't established his MO yet, but it didn't fit. In the murder of the woman in Imundong, she was finishing a shift at a small clothing boutique in a downtown area when she was approached by Yoo Youngchul dressed as a cop. He lured her away from the shop thinking she was a sex worker, wanting to punish her by killing her. But I don't want to confuse you by putting this image in your head, because it didn't happen. Yoo Youngchul, very early into the trial, would recant the specific confession, stating that the police failed to uphold their end of the bargain, so he wasn't going to confess to this. Apparently, they had told him if he confessed to a few extra murders, they would send his son to university, but he realized this wasn't going to happen. And 2 years later, another serial killer, Jung Nam-gyu, would be found guilty of murdering that woman. So we know it wasn't him. But at the time of the trial, Jung Nam-gyu was still at large, and he wouldn't be caught for another 2 years. I'll add Jung Nam-gyu to the list of cases to cover in the future. But because the prosecution had tried to falsely tie Yoo Youngchul to this other murder, it meant progress had not been made in that victim's investigation. They'd essentially stopped investigating her murder because of this. Imagine that was your daughter. What would you do? Because on July 25th, while being transported to court, Ms. Jung, the 50-year-old mother of the Lee Mun-dang victim, who falsely believed that Yoo Youngchul was the killer, charged at him while wielding an umbrella. She screamed at him, "My daughter wouldn't be dead if you guys had captured that man earlier." She was just as mad at Yoo Youngchul as she was the officers. When she swung her umbrella, the officer closest to her lifted his leg and kicked her square in the chest, causing her to fall backwards down the building's entrance stairs. The police said that this was an accident. They meant to just hold her back with their foot, but she ran into them with so much force that she fell backwards. There was a ton of media there for the trial. It was all caught on camera, and it clearly showed him kicking her in the chest. Some officers would blame Japan's Fuji TV, stating that this was all a setup. But the Korean Fuji TV reporter denied setting it up and just was there getting footage. After a ton of public backlash, the police chief had to issue a public apology, promising to discipline the officer and protect victims' families better. But the damage was already done. They had kicked a victim's mom down the stairs, protecting a serial killer who confessed. Sure, they can't just let people assault him, but maybe don't kick the victim's 50-year-old mom who just wanted to get a good swing in with an umbrella. Even if it turned out that he wasn't her daughter's killer, you can't really blame her for being so mad. By August 13th, 2004, Yoo Youngchul was transferred to the Seoul District Public Prosecutor's Office for a more detailed investigation, which their deadline was a week later. The lead prosecutors were Lee Seung-young and Lee Kun-seok, but they had a team of about 6 people with them when they went to the prison. 2 prison officers had to be in the room at all times, and there was a doctor nearby just in case of his infamously convenient seizures. They realized they couldn't focus on getting a confession from him, as the police had been doing, because Yoo Youngchul was erratic. He didn't make sense half of the time. He was always going back and forth between confessing and denying. He was a madman. Forensic examiner Dr. Bak Hwae-kyung said that she was haunted by the remains they found on the mountain. She said, "How can a human be this evil?" It wasn't just murder he was committing. It was rage, hate, evil, malice, insanity. All of his trials were a spectacle. He was facing 20 counts total, including sexual violence, rape, arson, desecration of a corpse, forgery, impersonation of an officer, assault, extortion, concealment of a body, theft, and escape in the first degree. In court, he turned to the audience and said, "I would like to apologize to the victims for what I have done. I'm sorry." But when questioned about his crimes, he proudly said had he not been caught, he would have continued killing forever. He was only getting started when they caught him. A criminal psychologist who interviewed him prior to the trial stated that he had antisocial traits. He had a general distrust of society and lacked remorse. He even told the psychologist that he'd kill more than 100 women if he could. They conducted a psychopathy assessment on him, which a score of 25 points or more is an indicator for antisocial personality disorder. Yoo Youngchul scored 23 points. So close, but not enough to be definitive. When trying to categorize Yoo Youngchul, it's really difficult. It's difficult to distinguish if he is a psychopath, a pleasure killer, or killing as a hate crime, or all of the above. His motivation was hatred towards the wealthy, towards women, specifically women sex workers. After the first trial, of which there would be many, he shouted at the prosecution that he was not going to come to the next trial, and the judge scoffed. It wasn't his choice whether he would appear or not. This clearly upset him because Yoo Youngchul got up, jumped out of his seat, ran towards the judges, tried climbing up the bench to attack them. He fell backwards while climbing onto the ground, and then more than a dozen officers tackled him. It's surprising he was only handcuffed at this point, considering we've covered minor criminals who were shackled hands and feet in court. Yoo Youngchul had fled before even, proving he was violent towards officers. He was a wild card that couldn't be trusted, and they were just handcuffing him in court. They took him back to the Seoul Detention Center, where on October 3rd, he attempted to end his own life by hanging himself with an electrical wire he took from the wall fan. The guards were quick to stop him, however. His hearing was the following day, October 4th, and he didn't want to go. So with this suicide attempt just a day prior, they weren't going to try to force him to go to court, so his hearing was rescheduled. Ultimately, he did decide when he appeared in court by just threatening to take his own life. He wanted to have control over any situation he possibly could, but he was going to have to eventually appear in court. And on October 25th, they tried to transport him to court, but he overheard a protester shouting obscenities and belittling him in the courtroom. Yoo Youngchul was visibly upset by this. He turned and lunged at the spectators, trying to attack them with a violent look on his face. 10 guards had to hold him back. In the process of him acting out, he even broke 2 chairs. He was only allowed back into the courtroom after he signed a written statement that he wouldn't cause any further commotions. He'd already tried to attack a judge and spectators. He told the court, "It's agonizing for me to be alive. I don't think I even killed human beings." He genuinely believed that. He genuinely believed he had not killed anyone human because he believed sex workers were subhuman. He said, "They're not normal women. They deserved to be killed by me." December 13th, 2004, the Seoul Central District Court sentences him to death. Yoo Youngchul stared at the judge like he was trying to kill him with his eyes. He abandoned the appeal process immediately, but the prosecution did appeal his Imundong acquittal, which was dismissed. On June 9, 2005, the Supreme Court upheld his death sentence for 20 years. On June 9, 2005, the Supreme Court would uphold the death sentence for 20 murders. The government compensated the victims' families up to 10 million won each due to a 1988 law which holds the state responsible for failing to protect citizens. Yoo Youngchul was sent to Seoul Detention Center, where he remains to this day. He had been transferred to a prison in Daegu for a short period, but was sent back to Seoul in 2023. He remains in prison more than 20 years later because South Korea hasn't carried out executions since 1997. There's a lot of discussions about the death penalty, but everything is only in the talking phase at this point. That wasn't the end of Yoo Youngchul's story, however. He continued to be an erratic nightmare in prison. He thought he was untouchable because he was on death row, knowing that he wouldn't be executed. He had received the harshest sentence possible, so he wasn't really worried about anything. He would even intimidate guards by telling them that he was a psychopath. Nothing would happen to him if he killed a prisoner or a guard, because he's already sentenced to death. What more are they going to do to him? Regularly, he would threaten other prisoners, stating he had a plan to kill 2 people in prison, 1 gangster and 1 person there for economic crimes. Because he kept trying to start shit with other prisoners, they had to keep multiple guards around him at all times. But the guards are scared of him too. All of this behavior because he wanted to retain that control he so desperately wanted. Yoo Youngchul was doing anything he could in prison for both attention and the control of others. He was destroying things that other people cared about, like a flower garden that the prison communally used to relax by. Apparently, he had even ripped off a guard's toupee in an altercation, clearly wanting to belittle that guard. In November 2014, he was back in the news again when he was caught smuggling in Japanese manga and pornography by bribing guards. After he was caught and had all of his things taken away, he started a riot, basically throwing a huge temper tantrum. I hate so much that these cases focus on the killer only. I wish I could say more about the victims and their lives because they weren't just numbers. They were people who loved them. Specifically in this case, the news tends to skip over the cases of sex workers and focuses mainly on the elderly wealthy who were murdered. They also deserve remembering, but so do those that we shy away from discussing because their work is hard for some to discuss. This wasn't just murder. This was hate. Yoo Youngchul targeted these women because they were easy to get into private areas, have control over, and he knew they were less likely to be investigated by the police. He used his hatred of his ex-girlfriend and stepmother as an excuse to kill these vulnerable women. And he was right. The police were not investigating the missing sex workers. Their families had reported many of them missing, but due to their career, the police didn't catch Yoo Youngchul. The gangsters did. The police took credit, of course, but they did not do enough. This case even inspired a film, which we are going to watch together on Discord, called The Chaser. Yoo Youngchul would be so upset by his depiction that he had written countless letters to a man who was portrayed as the protagonist in the film. Not the actor, but the real man who inspired the main character, who was a boyfriend of one of the victims. The man was one of the Porobang managers who assisted in the arrest of Yoo Youngchul, to my understanding, but I have not watched the film yet, so I'm not sure how he's depicted in the film. In his letters, Yoo Youngchul wrote, "No matter how bad people are, if you treat them as individuals and show interest in them, they'll at least feel sorry and restrain themselves. But this place, prison, they just yell at each other and distrust each other. It's a demon breeding ground. Our society, which has lost the right to pursue happiness, is bound to have more people like me." As profound as these words are, he's just making an excuse for the reason he is the way he is. Of course, if you treat a child kindly despite the bad behaviors, they're bound to change and become a better person. I understand this as someone who's worked with young learners for more than 7 years, but consequences come as a result of action. I'm not sure if I'm alone in saying this, but he has barely received consequence for his actions. When you read a letter written by Yoo Youngchul in more recent years, you can see how messed up his mind is. He's not thinking clearly at all. His letters read like the rambling of a madman. He's childish and immature, name-calling the victims. There's an Instagram page, Murder in East Asia, who posted a letter they collected from someone who wrote to Yoo Youngchul. The letter reads, as translated by the Hanguk subreddit, "Voluptuous Ingrid Bergman, I'll have sex gently. I understand your wish is to live with Dad. The war is over. Wait for me to come out. I will get out." Apparently, the letter written to Yoo Youngchul did not mention anything that would make this make sense. But apparently, he really likes Ingrid Bergman, who was a very famous actress in the 40s. The remaining question I had about Yoo Youngchul was, what box does he fit into? Professor Cho Eun-kyung, a psychologist from Hallym University, spent a lot of time trying to figure out Yoo Youngchul. She believes that cannibalism was never the motivation for his killings. If he truly committed cannibalism, which there's now more belief that he truly did, it didn't begin until much later into the murders. Early on, he wasn't truly sure about his own motives. He left his knife behind in his first murder. By the next year, he was needing to blow up a car to cover his mistakes. Professor Cho calls this his evolutionary stage. He never truly stayed in one spot for long, and in the grand scheme, he never truly left the city. As he moved from killing people he despised to women who resembled the women who abandoned him, like ex-wife, ex-girlfriend, mother, stepmother, that's when he started taking pleasure in the killings. He wasn't just punishing people anymore. He was getting something out of it. He was spending time with these women before killing them, eating with them, talking to them, sometimes sleeping with them. To this day, the investigation into the extent of Yoo Youngchul's crimes is still open. He claims there are 5 more bodies buried on the mountain, but nothing has ever been found. He said that he marked each of the graves with tin cans, but these would have been washed away by now and nothing has been found. These 5 women, he says, lived with him following his release from prison in 2002. He states that he lived with female students after his release, and there is some validity to this claim because he had a transportation card that tracked his public transit movements during that time. And 3 or 4 of the other women were indeed on the bus with him on more than one occasion. That is all the police have said about this. Likely, this lead has gone cold since then because I can't find anything that has been stated by the police about this since 2014. It's unfortunate we don't know much more about the case beyond this. There must be more to learn about this because to this day, Yoo Youngchul has refused to allow photographs of himself to be shared. The only photographs we have are from his school days and of his fake police ID. During the trial, he insisted he was able to wear a cloth face mask or a surgical mask with a ball cap to hide his face. There are a few videos and photos of him traveling to court without a face mask back when he was arrested in 2000. But he looks really different in this just from the photo ID he used. He told reporters he didn't want his image on TV because many more sexual assault victims would come forward. This might be that he just wants the notoriety, but it also might be true. He is known to be a rapist. It is likely he had committed many more crimes than the police are aware of. Professor Kwon Il-young, a criminal profiler, had spoken to Yoo Youngchul and noticed what I think perfectly sums him up. Professor Kwon said that Yoo Youngchul was the kind of person who endlessly packaged himself and put a lot of effort into making himself look good to others. He always wanted to appear smart. He would constantly be reading and researching history, not to actually be smart about those topics, but to appear smart in front of others. He only knew enough to say smart things. Yoo Youngchul asked Professor Kwon if he had heard of Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento, a horrific cannibal and necrophile. The professor, of course, had heard of them, but pretended they hadn't. And Yoo Youngchul did what he expected, started telling him all about it, dissecting the case, hypothesizing. Then, suddenly he said, Richard Chase was mentally ill. I'm sane. Thank you for joining me on Korean True Crime. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it or leave a review. Check the description for a link to our Discord, Patreon, and find the new merch. Find my sources for free on Patreon. Thank you so much to my patrons for all of the support and keeping this show going. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.